The day I found my son lying on the classroom floor, his eyes wide open but seeing nothing, I knew I had killed something inside him without even knowing. I teased him. My name is David, and I thought I was a good father. I worked 16 hours a day at my construction company in Lagos, came home tired but proud that I could pay school fees, buy food, and keep the lights on. I thought that was enough. I thought providing was loving. But here's what I didn't know then, and what I wish every parent would understand before it's too late. Sometimes the thing that breaks our children isn't what we do to them. It's what we don't do. Let me tell you about my son Michael, 10 years old, with eyes that sparkled like stars and a smile that could light up our small apartment in Surrey. He was quiet. Yes, but I thought that was good. Quiet children don't get in trouble. Quiet children study hard. Quiet children make their fathers proud. I was wrong about everything. The morning it all began to fall apart started like any other. Tuesday. My alarm rang at 5 a.m., and I jumped out of bed like a soldier. Coffee, quick shower, check my phone for work messages. Michael was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with his school books spread out in front of him. "Good morning, Daddy," he said softly, looking up at me with those bright eyes that I was scrolling through my phone, reading an urgent message from my site supervisor. "Morning, son. Make sure you eat your breakfast. I'll be late tonight, big meeting with the client." I didn't look at him when I said it. I was too busy typing a reply. "Daddy, can I tell you something?" Michael's voice was smaller now, almost a whisper. "Not now, Michael. I'm busy. Tell your mother when she wakes up." I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, but something made me turn back. Michael was still sitting there, staring at his empty plate. His shoulders looked smaller somehow, like he was trying to disappear. "Michael, eat your food. You can't go to school on an empty stomach." He nodded quickly and picked up his spoon. But I noticed his hands were shaking. I should have stopped. I should have asked why. Instead, I checked my watch and rushed out the door. That night, I came home at 11 p.m. to find my wife Sarah waiting for me in the living room. She had that look on her face, the one that said we needed to talk. "David, we need to discuss Michael." I dropped my briefcase and loosened my tie. "What about him? His grades are good, right?" "His grades are perfect. Too perfect." I stared at her. "How can grades be too perfect?" Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the busy street below. "His teacher called today. She said Michael hasn't spoken to anyone in his class for 3 weeks. Not a single word. So, he's always been quiet. David, she said he sits alone at lunch. When other children try to talk to him, he just stares at them like he's scared. When she asked him a question in class today, he started crying. I felt a tiny knot form in my stomach, but I pushed it away. He's probably just shy. I was shy when I was his age. You were never shy, David. You were confident, even as a child. Your mother told me stories. Look, Sarah, I'm tired. I've been working all day to keep this family together. Michael is fine. He's just adjusting. Adjusting to what? I couldn't answer that question because I didn't know. But deep down, something was whispering that maybe I should be paying more attention. Maybe I should be worrying. The next morning, I decided to watch Michael more carefully. I woke up earlier and sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, pretending to read my phone but actually observing my son. Michael came out of his room dressed in his school uniform. He looked smaller. Then I remembered, like his clothes were too big for him. He moved quietly, almost like he was afraid of making noise. "Good morning, son." He jumped a little, like my voice had startled him. "Good morning, Daddy. How did you sleep?" Michael opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes that made my chest tight. It was like he was trying to tell me something important, but he couldn't find the words. "I slept fine," he finally whispered, but I could see the dark circles under his eyes. I could see how his hands trembled when he poured his cereal. I could see how he kept glancing at me like he was waiting for something. But what? "Michael, is everything okay at school?" His eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought he was going to tell me everything. I thought he was going to open up and let me into whatever was happening in his little world. Instead, he nodded quickly. "Everything is fine, Daddy. Are you sure? You can tell me anything." He stared at me for what felt like forever. Then, very quietly, he said, "I know you're busy, Daddy. I don't want to bother you." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. When had I made my son feel like he was bothering me? When had I become too busy for the most important person in my world? But before I could ask him what he meant, my phone rang. Work emergency. I looked at Michael, then at my phone, then back. At Michael. I answered the phone. David, the concrete delivery is wrong. We need you here now, or the whole project will be delayed. I watched Michael's face fall. He turned back to his cereal, his shoulders drooping. I'll be right there. I said into the phone. I hung up and looked at my son. He was eating his cereal very slowly, like he was trying to make the moment last longer. Michael, I have to go. But tonight, when I come home, we'll talk. Just you and me. Okay. He nodded, but he didn't look up from his bowl. I kissed the top of his head and left for work, promising myself that tonight would be different. Tonight, I would listen. Tonight, I would be the father he needed. But that night, there was another emergency. And the night after that, another client dinner. And the night after that, I was so tired I fell asleep on the couch before Michael even finished his homework. Days turned into weeks, and I kept making the same promise to myself. Tomorrow, I would sit down with Michael. Tomorrow, I would ask him what was wrong. Tomorrow, I would be better, but tomorrow never came. Meanwhile, Michael was disappearing right in front of my eyes. He stopped asking me questions. He stopped showing me his drawings. He stopped trying to tell me about his day. When I came home, he would greet me politely and then disappear into his room. Sarah kept trying to tell me something was wrong. David, he's not eating properly. He's losing weight. He's just growing. Children go through phases. David, he had a nightmare last night. He was crying and saying, I'm sorry over and over. What does he have to be sorry for? I didn't know. I didn't know what my son was carrying inside his little heart, and I didn't know it was getting heavier every day. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. I was at the construction site, arguing with a supplier about delayed materials, when my phone rang. It was Sarah, and she was crying. David, you need to come to the school. Now. What happened? Michael, he collapsed. They're calling an ambulance. The world stopped. Everything around me, the noise of the construction site, the argument with the supplier, the pressure of deadlines, all of it disappeared. There was only one thing that mattered. I drove to the school like a man possessed, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I arrived, I saw the ambulance parked outside, its lights flashing. Parents were gathering, whispering to each other. And looking worried, I ran inside and found Sarah in the principal's office, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. Where is he? I asked. They took him to the hospital. David, they said he was having a panic attack. A panic attack? He's only 10 years old. The principal, Mrs. Johnson, looked at me with sad eyes. Mr. David, I think we need to talk about Michael. I sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk. What happened? Michael was in math class. The teacher asked him to solve a problem on the board. He stood up, walked to the front of the class, and just froze. He stood there for 5 minutes, staring at the board. When the teacher asked if he was okay, he started shaking. Then he said something that broke my heart. What did he say? He said, I'm sorry I'm not good enough. I'm sorry I disappoint everyone. I'm sorry I'm not worth talking to. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Then he collapsed. The school nurse said his heart was racing. He was hyperventilating, and he kept saying he was sorry over and over again. Sarah was crying again. David, what have we done to our baby? Mrs. Johnson leaned forward. Mr. David, I've been watching Michael for months. He's an excellent student, but he's been withdrawing more and more. He doesn't participate in class discussions. He doesn't play with other children. He spends lunchtime sitting alone, reading the same book over and over. What book? I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered. A book about a little boy who becomes invisible because no one pays attention to him. I felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart. Mrs. Johnson, is Michael? Is he going to be okay? Physically, yes. But Mr. David, your son is carrying a burden that no child should carry. He thinks he's not worth your time. He thinks he's not good enough to deserve your attention. He thinks he's invisible. But I love him. I work so hard for him. Everything I do is for him. I know you do, Mr. David. But love isn't just about providing. Love is about presence. It's about listening. It's about making your child feel like they matter more than anything else in the world. I drove to the hospital in silence, my mind racing. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind? I thought about all the times Michael had tried to talk to me, all the times he had looked at me with those hopeful eyes, all the times I had chosen work over him. At the hospital, I found Michael in a small room, connected to monitors that beeped softly. He looked so small in that hospital bed, like a little bird with broken wings. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. When he saw me, he tried to smile, but it was the saddest smile I had ever seen. "Hi, Daddy." I sat down beside his bed and took his small hand in mine. It was so cold. "Michael, I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what, Daddy?" "For not listening. For not seeing. For making you feel like you don't matter." His eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to be a burden, Daddy. I know you're busy. I know work is important." "Michael, look at me." He turned his head, and I saw my reflection in his eyes. I saw a man who had been chasing the wrong things, who had been so busy providing for his family that he had forgotten to actually be with them. "Son, you are not a burden. You are the most important thing in my life. More important than work, more important than money, more important than anything. I'm sorry I made you feel otherwise. But Daddy, you're always busy. You always have important things to do. Michael, nothing is more important than you. Nothing. Do you understand me?" He nodded, but I could see he didn't really believe me. And why should he? I had spent months showing him the opposite. The doctor came in and explained that Michael had experienced a severe anxiety attack brought on by emotional stress. "Children this age shouldn't be carrying this kind of psychological burden," she said. "He needs support, therapy, and most importantly, he needs to feel secure in his family relationships." That night, I sat in the hospital chair watching Michael sleep. Sarah had gone home to get some rest, but I couldn't leave. I kept thinking about all the signs I had missed, all the moments I had chosen work over my son. I thought about the morning he had tried to tell me something important, and I had told him to talk to his mother instead. I thought about the drawings he had made for me that I had barely glanced at. I thought about the school projects he had been proud of that I had said, "Good job," to without really looking at. I thought about the book he was reading about the invisible boy, and I realized that's exactly how I had made him feel. Invisible. Around midnight, Michael woke up. He looked around, confused for a moment, then saw me sitting beside him. "Daddy, why are you still here?" "Because this is where I belong. With you." "But don't you have work tomorrow?" "Michael, I want to tell you something, and I want you to listen very carefully. You are more important to me than any job, any client, any amount of money. Do you understand?" He stared at me with those big eyes. "But you're always working." "I know, son. And that was wrong. I thought I was being a good father by working hard to provide for you. But I forgot the most important part of being a father." "What's that?" "Being present. Being here. Listening to you. Making you feel loved and valued and heard." Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then, very softly, he said, "Daddy, I have something to tell you." "I'm listening, son. I'm really listening." "I've been scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared that you don't like me. Scared that I'm not good enough. Scared that if I talk too much or ask too many questions, you'll get angry and not want to be my daddy anymore." My heart shattered into a million pieces. "Michael, that could never happen. I will always be your daddy, no matter what. And I love you exactly as you are. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be quiet. You don't need to be anything other than my son." "Really? Really? And from now on, things are going to be different. I'm going to be here. I'm going to listen. I'm going to make time for you every single day." "What about work?" "Work will wait." "You won't. You're only 10 once, and I've already missed too much." Michael reached out and hugged me, and I held him tight, feeling his small body shake with relief. In that moment, I made a promise to myself and to him. I would never again let my son feel invisible. I would never again choose anything over being his father. But as I held him, I wondered if it was too late. Had I already damaged him beyond repair? Could I undo months of emotional neglect? Could I teach him to trust me again? And then Michael said something that gave me hope. "Daddy, tomorrow, can we talk about my day? I have lots of things to tell you." "Yes, son. Tomorrow and every day after that." As he drifted back to sleep, I sat there planning how I would change our life. I would restructure my work schedule. I would hire more help at the company. I would make sure that every day, Michael knew he was the most important person in my world. But I also knew that words weren't enough. I had to prove it. I had to show him, day after day, that he mattered, that he was worth my time, that he was worth everything. The next morning, instead of rushing to work, I stayed with Michael. We had breakfast together in the hospital cafeteria, and I listened as he told me about his favorite subjects at school, his friends, his dreams, his fears that I learned that he loved science because he wanted to understand how things worked. I learned that he was afraid of the dark because he thought too much when he was alone. I learned that his favorite color was blue because it reminded him of the sky, and the sky was so big it made him feel like anything was possible. I learned that my son was brilliant and sensitive and creative and funny. I learned that I had been living with this amazing little person and barely knew him at all. When the doctor said Michael could go home, I made a decision. Instead of dropping him off and rushing to work, I took the day off. We went to the park. We got ice cream. We talked about everything and nothing. And for the first time in months, I saw Michael smile. Really smile. Not the polite, careful smile he gave me when he was trying not to bother me, but the bright, genuine smile that lit up his whole face. That evening, as we sat on the couch watching his favorite cartoon, Michael curled up next to me and said, "Daddy, I missed you. I missed you too, son. More than you know. Are you really going to be different now?" I looked down at his trusting face and felt the weight of that question. This was my chance to rebuild our relationship, to show him that he mattered, to prove that I could be the father he needed. But I also knew that one good day wasn't enough. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, and I had months of neglect to make up for. "Michael, I'm going to try every day to be better. Some days I might mess up, but I promise I will never stop trying. And I promise that from now on, you will never feel invisible again." That night, as I tucked Michael into bed, he looked up at me with those bright eyes and said, "Daddy, I love you. I love you too, son. So much." "Daddy, yes, tomorrow. Can I tell you about the story I'm writing? I can't wait to hear it." As I turned off the lights and closed his door, I felt hopeful for the first time in months. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe I could still be the father Michael needed. Maybe I could still earn back his trust and help him find his voice again. But I also knew that the real test was just beginning. Tomorrow, there would be work pressures. There would be deadlines and client meetings and 100 reasons to fall back into old patterns. The question was, would I be strong enough to keep my promise? Would I be able to choose my son over everything else, every single day? I thought about the invisible boy in Michael's book and made a silent vow. My son would never feel invisible again. No matter what it cost me, no matter how hard it was, I would make sure he knew he was seen, heard, and loved. But as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our story. Michael was starting to trust me again, but he was still fragile. He was still carrying the weight of months of feeling unimportant. And I was about to learn that healing a broken heart, especially a child's heart, takes more than good intentions. It takes consistent action, day after day, until trust is rebuilt and love is proven. The question was, did I have what it took to see this through? Did I have the strength to change not just my schedule, but my whole approach to being a father? I was about to find out. What happens next will determine whether David can truly rebuild his relationship with Michael or whether the damage runs too deep to heal. Will Michael find his voice again? Will David prove that he can change? And what surprising truth about Michael's silence is still waiting to be discovered? 3 weeks later, I discovered the real reason my son had stopped talking, and it wasn't what I thought at all. That I had been trying so hard to be a better father. I came home earlier from work. I sat with Michael during dinner. I helped him with his homework. I read him bedtime stories. I thought I was fixing everything, but Michael was still quiet. He answered my questions, but he didn't volunteer information. He smiled when I talked to him, but the smile never reached his eyes. He was polite, grateful even, but something was still missing. That it was like he was performing the role of a happy child instead of actually being 1.1 morning. I was getting ready for work when I heard Michael talking to someone in his room. My heart jumped with joy. Finally, he was talking freely, naturally, the way a child should. I walked quietly to his door to listen, expecting to hear him on the phone with a friend from school. Instead, I heard him talking to his teddy bear. "Mr. Brown, I tried to tell Daddy about the bullies, but he was busy. Then I tried to tell Mommy, but she was worried about Daddy working too much. So I decided to just be quiet. Maybe if I'm quiet enough, the bullies will forget about me too." My blood turned to ice. Bullies? I pushed the door open gently. Michael was sitting on his bed, holding his old teddy bear close to his chest. "Michael!" He jumped and quickly put the teddy bear down, his face turning red. "Hi, Daddy. I was just getting ready for school." "Son, What were you just saying about bullies? His eyes went wide with fear. Nothing, Daddy. I was just playing. Michael, you can tell me anything. What bullies? He looked down at his hands. It's okay, Daddy. You don't have to worry about it. Michael, look at me. He raised his eyes slowly. I am your father. It's my job to worry about you. It's my job to protect you. Now please, tell me what's happening at school. For a moment, I thought he was going to tell me everything. His mouth opened, and I saw the words fighting to come out. But then he shook his head. I don't want to bother you, Daddy. You're trying so hard to be good to me now. I don't want to give you more problems. This child, this beautiful, caring child, was protecting me from his own pain. He was more worried about my feelings than his own safety. Michael, you are not a problem. You are my son. Your problems are my problems. Your pain is my pain. Please, tell me what's happening. He was quiet for a long time. Then, very slowly, he began to speak. There are 3 boys in my class. James, Peter, and John. They say I'm weird because I read too much. They say I'm stupid because I don't talk much. They take my lunch money. They push me when the teacher isn't looking. They call me names. Each word was like a knife in my heart. How long has this been going on? Since the beginning of the school year. For months. My son had been suffering for 4 months, and I had been too busy to notice. Michael, why didn't you tell me? I tried, Daddy. Remember that morning when I wanted to tell you something? You said you were busy and I should talk to Mommy. But when I tried to tell Mommy, she was on the phone with Grandma talking about how stressed you were at work. So I decided to just handle it myself. Handle it how? I thought if I was very quiet and very good, maybe they would leave me alone. I thought if I didn't cause any trouble at home, at least you and Mommy would be happy. I thought if I was perfect, maybe someone would like me. I felt like I was drowning. Michael, I love you. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be you. But Daddy, I'm not good at being me. When I'm me, kids don't like me. When I'm me, I talk too much about books and science. When I'm me, I ask too many questions. When I'm me, I'm not cool or funny or brave. Michael, being you is the most wonderful thing in the world. You are smart and kind and creative. Any child would be lucky to have you as a friend. Then why do James, Peter, and John hate me so much? I sat down on his bed and pulled him close. Because some children are taught to be mean. Some children haven't learned how to be kind. That's not your fault. That's never your fault. But Daddy, what if they're right? What if I am weird and stupid and, Michael, stop. Look at me. He looked up with tears in his eyes. You are not weird. You are unique. You are not stupid. You are brilliant. You are not worthless. You are precious. Do you understand? He nodded, but I could see he still didn't believe me. Michael, I want you to stay home from school today. I'm going to have a talk with your teacher and the principal. Daddy, no? That will make it worse. Michael, this cannot continue. You should not have to suffer in silence. But what if they get in trouble and then they're even meaner to me? I realized then that my son had been living in fear every single day. He had been carrying this burden alone, trying to protect everyone around him from his pain. Michael, I promise you, this will not get worse. I will make sure you are safe. That morning, I called my site supervisor and told him I wouldn't be coming in. For the first time in years, I put my son before my work without any guilt or hesitation. Sarah and I went to the school together. We met with Mrs. Johnson, the principal, and Michael's teacher, Miss Grace. We had no idea, Miss Grace said, looking shocked. Michael never said anything. He never complained. He just became quieter and quieter. That's the problem, Sarah said. Our son has been taught to suffer in silence. He's been taught that his pain doesn't matter. Mrs. Johnson nodded. We take bullying very seriously. We'll investigate this immediately and take appropriate action. I want to know exactly what you're going to do, I said. My son has been terrorized for 4 months. For months of taking his lunch money, pushing him, calling him names. This ends today. They brought James, Peter, and John to the office. When they saw me and Sarah there, they looked nervous. Boys, Mrs. Johnson said, we need to talk about your behavior toward Michael. We were just playing, James said quickly. Taking someone's lunch money is not playing, I said, my voice harder than I intended. Pushing someone is not playing. Calling someone names is not playing. It's bullying. Peter looked down at his feet. We didn't mean to hurt him. You made my son feel like he wasn't worth protecting, Sarah said. You made him feel like he deserved to be treated badly. You made him stop talking because he was afraid of being hurt. John started crying. We're sorry. We didn't know it was hurting him so much. My son collapsed from stress because of what you did to him, I said. He had to go to the hospital because he was so scared and anxious that his body couldn't handle it anymore. All three boys looked genuinely shocked and sorry. They were young, and I could see they hadn't understood the real impact of their actions. What you did was wrong, Mrs. Johnson said. You will apologize to Michael, and you will face consequences for your behavior. But more importantly, you will learn why this behavior is unacceptable. The school arranged for the boys to meet with the counselor to understand the impact of bullying. They would also do community service and write letters of apology to Michael. But I knew that wasn't enough. The damage had been done. My son had learned that the world could be cruel, that he couldn't trust adults to protect him, that his pain didn't matter. When we got home, Michael was waiting for us anxiously. Are you in trouble? He asked immediately. No, son, you're not in trouble. You did nothing wrong. What about James, Peter, and John? They're going to face consequences for their behavior, and they're going to learn why what they did was wrong. Are they going to be mad at me? Michael, even if they are, that's not your problem. You told the truth. You protected yourself. That's what you're supposed to do. But Daddy, what if other kids think I'm a snitch? I knelt down in front of him. Michael, a snitch is someone who tells on people to get them in trouble. You told on people to protect yourself from being hurt. That's not snitching. That's being brave. I don't feel brave. Brave isn't about not being scared. Brave is about doing the right thing even when you are scared. You were scared, but you finally told us the truth. That's very brave. Over the next few days, I watched Michael carefully. He seemed relieved that the bullying was over, but he was still quiet. He still seemed to be waiting for something bad to happen. One evening, as I was tucking him into bed, he said something that broke my heart all over again. Daddy, are you going to get tired of being nice to me? What do you mean? You've been so good to me since I went to the hospital. You come home early. You listen to me. You help me with my homework. But what if you get tired of it? What if you decide work is more important again? I sat on the edge of his bed, feeling the weight of his question. This was the real issue. It wasn't just about the bullying. It was about trust. My son didn't trust that my love for him was permanent. He didn't trust that I would choose him over work consistently. Michael, I want to tell you something important. I love you not because you're good, not because you're quiet, not because you don't cause problems. I love you because you're my son. That will never change. But Daddy, before, you loved me, but you were still too busy for me. You're right. I did love you, but I wasn't showing it in the right way. I thought working hard for you was the same as being there for you. I was wrong. What if you forget again? Michael, I might make mistakes. I might have bad days. But I will never forget again that you are the most important thing in my life. Promise. I promise. And you know what? If you ever feel like I'm forgetting, you have permission to remind me. You can tell me, Daddy, you're being too busy again. And I will stop whatever I'm doing and listen to you. Really? Really? In fact, let's make a deal. Every day, after school, we'll spend at least 1 hour together. Just you and me. No phones, no work, no distractions. We'll call it Michael and Daddy time. How does that sound? Asterisk for the first time in months. I saw genuine excitement in his eyes. Can we do whatever I want during our time? Within reason, yes. What would you like to do? Can you teach me about your work? I want to understand what you do all day. I was surprised. You want to learn about construction? I want to understand the things that are important to you. Maybe if I understand them, I can be part of them instead of competing with them. This child, this wise, thoughtful child, he was teaching me about love and priorities and what really mattered. Michael, you don't compete with my work. You are more important than my work. But yes, I would love to teach you about construction. Maybe one day you can even visit one of my sites. Really? Really? Would you like that? Yes. And, Daddy, can I also teach you about the books I read? I would love that. I want to know about everything you love. That night, I lay in bed thinking about how much I had learned about my son in just a few weeks. He was more complex, more thoughtful, more caring than I had ever realized. He had been trying to protect everyone around him from his pain, even at the cost of his own well-being. The next day, I did something I had never done before. I brought Michael to my construction site. He wore a small hard hat and safety vest, and his eyes were wide with wonder as he looked at the building we were constructing. Daddy, you build houses where families will live. Yes, son. This will be an apartment building. Many families will make their homes here. That's so cool. You're helping people have safe places to live. That's one way to think about it. Daddy, I'm proud of you. Those words meant more to me than any praise from a client or boss ever had. That we spent the afternoon together, and I explained how buildings were constructed, how we made sure they were safe, how we worked with architects and engineers. Michael asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested. On the way home, he said, Daddy, now I understand why your work is important. But I'm glad you decided I'm important too. You were always important, Michael. I just forgot to show it. I know, Daddy, and I forgive you. Children are so quick to forgive, so ready to love again. I didn't deserve such grace, but I was grateful for it. That evening, during our Michael and Daddy time, he told me about the book he was reading. It was about a young scientist who discovered a new planet. Michael, do you want to be a scientist? When you grow up? Maybe. Or maybe I want to be a builder like you. Or maybe I want to be a teacher. I want to do something that helps people. You already help people, son. You have a kind heart. You care about others. That's a gift. Daddy, can I tell you something? Always. I was scared to tell you about the bullies because I thought you would be disappointed in me. I thought you would think I was weak for letting them hurt me. Michael, you are not weak. You are strong. You survived 4 months of bullying and still managed to be kind and caring. That takes incredible strength. Really, really. And you know what? The fact that you finally told me the truth shows that you're getting even stronger. Over the following weeks, I watched Michael slowly come back to life. He started talking more at dinner. He began showing me his drawings again. He asked questions about everything: why the sky was blue, how cars worked, what made flowers grow. But the most beautiful change was that he started laughing again. Real, genuine laughter that filled our small apartment with joy. One evening, about a month after the bullying situation had been resolved, Michael came to me with a big smile on his face. Daddy, guess what happened at school today? What? James, Peter, and John asked if they could sit with me at lunch. They said they were sorry for being mean, and they wanted to be my friends. How do you feel about that? I was scared at first, but then I remembered what you said about being brave. So I said yes. And you know what? They're actually nice when they're not being bullies. James loves science too. Peter is really good at drawing. And John knows lots of jokes. I'm proud of you for giving them a second chance. You taught me that people can change. Daddy, you changed. Maybe they can change too. That night, as I tucked Michael into bed, he said, Daddy, I have something to tell you. What is it, son? I'm happy. For the first time in a long time, I'm really happy. I'm happy too, Michael. You know why? Why? Because I didn't just get my son back. I got to really know him for the first time. And he's even more wonderful than I imagined. Daddy, yes, I love you. I love you too, son. More than you'll ever know. 6 months later, I was sitting in the audience at Michael's school, watching him perform in the science fair. He was explaining his project about solar energy to a group of impressed parents and teachers. He spoke clearly and confidently, his eyes bright with excitement. This was the same child who had been too scared to speak in class, who had suffered in silence, who had collapsed from anxiety. Now he was thriving. Not just surviving, but truly thriving. After his presentation, he ran over to me and Sarah, his face glowing with pride. Did you see, Daddy? Did you see how many people were interested in my project? I saw, son. I'm so proud of you. I never thought I could talk in front of so many people. But then I remembered what you said about being brave, and I just pretended. I was talking to you. You were incredible, Michael. You're going to change the world someday. Maybe. But first, I want to finish being a kid. And I want to keep having our special time together. Always, son. Always. As we walked home that evening, Michael's hand in mine, I thought about how much had changed in just 1 year. I had almost lost my son without even knowing it. I had been so focused on providing for him that I had forgotten to actually be with him. But children are resilient. Love is powerful. And it's never too late to choose what matters most. Michael taught me that being a good father isn't about working harder or earning more money. It's about being present. It's about listening. It's about making your child feel seen and heard and valued. It's about showing up, not just paying up. That night, as I kissed Michael goodnight, he said, Daddy, thank you for saving me. You saved me too, son. You saved me from missing the most important thing in my life. What's that? You. Getting to be your father. Getting to watch you grow and learn and become the amazing person you already are. Daddy, yes, tomorrow. Can I tell you about the new book I'm reading? I can't wait to hear about it. And I meant it. I couldn't wait to hear about his book, his day, his thoughts, his dreams. I couldn't wait to be the father he deserved. Not someday, but right now, in this moment, and every moment after, because I had learned the most important lesson of my life. Children don't need perfect parents. They need present parents. They need to know they matter. They need to feel heard and seen and loved. And most importantly, they need to know that they are worth their parents' time. Michael was worth everything. And finally, I was showing him that every single day, the boy who had stopped talking was now full of words, full of life, full of hope. And I had the privilege of listening to every single one of them, because that's what fathers do. They listen. They show up. They choose their children over everything else. And they never, ever let their children feel invisible again. Moral lessons. Sometimes the most important conversations happen not when we're talking, but when we're truly listening. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children isn't success or money or opportunities, it's our presence. And sometimes the day everything falls apart is actually the day everything begins to heal. That Michael's story reminds us that every child needs more than food and shelter. They need to feel heard, loved, and understood. They need to know they matter more than deadlines, more than meetings, more than anything else in the world. Because in the end, success means nothing if we lose the people who matter most. And the greatest achievement any parent can have is a child who knows, without a doubt, that they are loved,